On a frozen world where love was forbidden and survival was mercy, one human dared to offer warmth to a dying alien. Exiled and Broken, the legend begins now. The wind howled like a living thing over the frozen plains of Norvvis. Shards of ice bit into Mira's skin as she trudged through the blizzard, clutching her son against her chest. The child's light, those soft orange veins glowing faintly across his skin, flickered weakly in the storm, a dying candle against a merciless void. Behind her, the cliffs of the luminary citadel were only a smear of blue fire and stone, her home now forbidden ground. The echo of the council's judgment still rang in her skull. For defying the collective will, Mara of the Northern Reach is exiled. Her child, born with forbidden variants, is stripped of clan protection. Let the void claim them both. But what broke her wasn't the sentence itself. It was the voice that pronounced it. Her sister, Liana. Mira could still see her standing tall in her ceremonial armor, the patterns along her face burning bright with authority, but trembling at the edges with grief. Liana hadn't looked at her directly when she delivered the words. Duty had smothered love. Law had devoured blood. Please, Mira had whispered, then her voice hoarse with salt and snow. He's a child, Liana. My child. And Liana had answered, that is why you must let him go. Now, 3 days later, the memory cut deeper than the cold. Kaelin stirred weakly in her arms. Mother, my light hurts. Mira looked down at him. The glowing circuits of his skin, the sacred patterns that marked every luminary, were dim, fading into gray. In their people's lore, such dimness was a sign of death approaching. No, she whispered fiercely, pulling him closer. Don't you fade. Not you. She stopped beneath a jagged ridge where winds screamed through fissures like voices of the damned. The world around them was colorless sky, snow, stone, all the same merciless shade. Only the faint orange from their skin broke the monochrome. She tore at her robe, wrapping a shred of it around Kaelin's feet. The fabric was once ceremonial silk embroidered with the sigil of her clan. Now it was just rags. She almost laughed at the irony. Once a priestess of the flame cycle, now a ghost in the storm. Why did they hate us? Kaelin's voice was small, trembling through chattering teeth. They didn't hate us, she lied. They feared us. Because of me. She paused. The truth was cruel, but so was silence. Yes, my love. Because of what you are. He said nothing after that, but his little fingers tightened around her arm, as if to promise he wouldn't let go. They walked until the light began to vanish behind the horizon where twin suns bled into dusk. The snow turned purple in the dying glow. Mira's legs screamed for rest. Her lungs burned, but she forced herself onward. Each step was a rebellion, each breath an act of war. She remembered the moment everything shattered, the day of the Ascension trials. Kaelin had been chosen by the seers for genetic harvesting, a sacred euphemism for dissection. His rare mutations, self-adaptive bioluminescent pathways, could rewrite luminary evolution. He was meant to be a template, but to Mira, he was just her son. When she refused to surrender him, the council turned on her with righteous fury. You defy progress, Elder Thra had thundered. I defy cruelty, she had shouted back. That defiance had cost her everything. Now alone on the waste, she wondered if her choice had damned them both. As the storm thickened, the sky cracked with lightning, a rare phenomenon on Norvvis. The light illuminated the horizon for a heartbeat, revealing jagged towers of frozen basalt. For a moment, she thought she saw movement shadows gliding along the ridgeline. Hunters, perhaps. Her pulse quickened. No more running, she muttered. But it wasn't conviction, it was exhaustion pretending to be courage. She spotted a hollow at the base of a slope and stumbled toward it. Inside, the wind dropped to a low moan. She sat, placing Kaelin on her lap. His breaths came shallow and quick. The orange light under his skin flickered erratically, sometimes bright, sometimes fading like a heartbeat, trying to remember its rhythm. Mira held him and began to hum a song from their childhood, the lullaby of embers. The words tasted of home sweet and poisonous. As she sang, her patterns pulsed faintly in harmony, with his trying to share warmth through light. But the temperature kept falling. Frost crept over the stone like veins of death. Mother, yes, my heart. Will the stars ever forgive us? Mira swallowed the lump in her throat. Stars don't forgive. They just shine so we remember who we are. Silence. Only the wind answered. She pressed her forehead to his, her patterns flickering brighter, in a desperate attempt to keep him alive. The bioluminescence danced erratically over their skin, painting the cave in waves of amber light. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a beacon. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the storm, beyond the ridges, a human sensor array registered that beacon. A man glanced at his monitor, frowned and muttered to himself, "What the hell are you doing out there?" Back in the cave, Mira's eyelids fluttered. She felt the edges of consciousness slipping. The cold was a weight pressing her down. But before darkness claimed her, she thought she heard a sound, distant, mechanical humming through the snow. A vehicle. Her heart stumbled. Hope, fragile, impossible, ignited in her chest. She gathered the last of her strength and whispered, "Hold on, Kaylin. Just a little longer. The stars aren't done with us yet." Outside, the storm howled, and through the white void, a faint light began to move toward them. The light came from a distant ridge, warm, steady, impossible. For a heartbeat, Mira thought it was a hallucination born of exhaustion. But when the light blinked again, rhythmic and artificial hope clawed its way up through her chest. She rose shakily, lifting Kalen into her arms. The boy's body was limp, his breath shallow. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice trembling between prayer and command. Then she started toward the light. The storm thickened, clawing at her every step. The glow grew larger, resolving into a small cluster of structures half buried in the snow. Primitive, made of metal and wood, not the organic alloy of luminary design. Smoke drifted from a chimney, glowing orange against the dusk. A farmhouse. No one sane lived this far north. As she neared the perimeter, a mechanical hum broke through the wind. She froze. A man stood in the yard operating a machine, a hoverloader stacked with bundled stalks of some alien crop. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in weather-beaten utility armor that looked decades old. His hair, streaked with gray, clung to his forehead in the icy wind. A human. Mira's instincts screamed danger. Humans were rare on Norvvis, and those who stayed often held deep grudges against her kind. But her son's weight in her arms silenced fear. She had no choice. She stepped forward, boots crunching on the frost. "Please," she called, voice cracking. "My son, we need shelter." The man turned sharply, one hand drifting toward a holstered sidearm. His eyes, startling blue like glacier light, scanned her, assessing everything: posture, condition, threat, potential. He said nothing for several heartbeats. Then, in the rough accent of the human frontier, he spoke. "Your luminary." Mira straightened instinctively, though her body begged her to collapse. "We have no clan now." The words burned her throat. The man's expression shifted. Something flickered there, recognition, pity. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pressed a control panel on his belt. A door behind him slid open with a pneumatic hiss. "Inside," he said gruffly, "before you freeze to death." Mira nearly wept from relief. "Thank you." He gave a curt nod, motioning her in. "Name's Torin." The interior hit her like a shockwave of warmth. The air carried the scent of wood oil and something cooking, rich and savory. She blinked against the sudden brightness, her eyes adjusting to the soft amber glow of old-style lamps. "Sit," Torin ordered, retrieving a pile of thick blankets. "You look half dead." She obeyed, sinking onto a worn seat as he wrapped Kalen in fabric that smelled faintly of herbs. The child stirred faintly, his dim patterns flickering against the human's rough hands. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning," Mira admitted, shame coloring her tone. "He hasn't, since then." Torin grunted disapproval low in his throat. He vanished into another room and returned with a steaming bowl. "It's not fancy," he said, placing it before her. "But it's hot. Eat." The aroma made her dizzy. She hesitated. Human food could be toxic to luminary biochemistry, but hunger silenced doubt. She took a tentative spoonful. The warmth spread down her throat, and her vision swam with tears. She looked up to find Torin watching her. His eyes weren't unkind, but there was distance there, the practiced caution of someone who had lived too long alone. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why help us?" He turned back to the stove, his shoulders tense. "Because a long time ago," he said slowly, "someone should have done the same for me." The silence that followed was thick, alive with things unsaid. When Kalen finally fell asleep beside her, wrapped in blankets, Torin brought her a cup of water and sat opposite her. For a moment he studied her, the faint glow tracing along her cheekbones, the weary dignity in her posture. "You're far from your territories," he said. "What are you running from?" Mira hesitated. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But something in his tone, that rough steadiness, disarmed her. My people wanted my son for their breeding program. His mutation makes him valuable. I refused. Torrens' jaw tightened. They'd have taken him, yes, to harvest. He exhaled slowly, eyes darkening. I've seen that kind of progress before. Different species, same evil. His words startled her. You've known Luminary. He gave a short nod. My wife was one. Mira froze. Was died 80 years ago. Scavenger raid while I was off-world. He stared into the flickering light. Never forgave myself for that. For the first time, his walls cracked. Mira saw the pain beneath old layered unhealed, and in that shared fracture, something passed between them recognition. Two exiles both haunted by loss. She reached out almost without thinking and placed her hand over his. I'm sorry. He didn't pull away. Eat, he said softly. You'll need strength. We'll figure the rest tomorrow. Later, as she lay on the couch beside her sleeping son, Mira let her mind drift. The warmth from the hearth seeped into her bones. The patterns along her skin brightened faintly, reacting to comfort for the first time in days. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Torren moving about the kitchen, methodical and silent. He carried himself like a man used to discipline, to solitude. And yet, when he glanced at Kaylin, his expression softened so briefly she almost missed it. The storm outside howled against the walls, but in here, there was peace. Mira's thoughts swirled as she drifted toward sleep. Who was this human who risked helping her kind? What ghost drove him, and why, for the first time since exile, did she feel safe? Her last sight before sleep claimed her was Torren at the window hand, resting unconsciously on the weapon at his hip, watching the blizzard with eyes that had seen too much. Somewhere in that silence, a vow was forming, not yet spoken but inevitable. Tomorrow the storm would pass. Tomorrow the strangers would no longer be strangers. Morning came with a golden haze bleeding through the frost-caked window. For the first time in days, Mira woke without fear. The silence was gentle here, broken only by the faint hum of heating vents and the rhythmic thud of tools outside. Kaylin still slept beside her, his breathing deep and even. His patterns, once dim and erratic, now pulsed with soft, healthy light. Relief washed through her like warmth after a long frost. She rose quietly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and stepped out into the corridor. The faint smell of oil and cooked grains guided her toward the kitchen. Torren stood by the stove, back turned, moving with the unhurried precision of habit. Your timing's good, he said without looking up. Breakfast's almost ready. Mira hesitated in the doorway. You knew I was awake, he tapped a finger against his temple. Sensors in the flooring, old reflex. Then he turned, offering a faint smirk. And your glow gives you away. Her hand instinctively went to her cheek where the faint orange tracery shimmered. Among my people, noticing another's patterns is intimate, he shrugged. Guess I'm rude then. The dry humor caught her off guard, and before she could stop herself, she smiled. It felt foreign, stretching muscles she hadn't used since before exile. They ate together in silence at first. The food was simple, but filling grain porridge mixed with local fruit and sweet spices. As she ate, Mira watched him over the rim of her bowl. His movements were efficient, deliberate. A man who'd spent a lifetime doing everything himself. You live here alone, she asked. Mostly, he said. Had a few workers once. Didn't last. Because you're human. Because I'm me, he said dryly, then added. But yeah, that too. He finished eating, wiped his hands, and stood. If you're staying a while, I'll need help around the place. Fair exchange. You work, you stay warm and fed. I don't want charity, she said quickly. His blue eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. Never thought you did. They spent the day tending to the fields outside. The snow had thinned, revealing rows of strange blue-green plants, their leaves glinting under the pale sun. The air was sharp, but the rhythm of labor eased her mind. Kaylin followed, bundled in thick clothes, laughing for the first time as one of Torren's animals, a woolly quadruped he called a sheep, nuzzled his hand. By dusk, Mira felt something she hadn't in months' normalcy. That night, after Kaylin had gone to bed, she joined Torren by the hearth. He sat in a worn chair, reading from a datapad, whose screen flickered occasionally. The firelight caught the lines of his face, highlighting the small scars along his jaw. Where did you get those? She asked quietly. Bad choices, he said without looking up. Then after a pause, military. Before all this. You fought in the war. He nodded. Colonial Defense Force. Special Operations. Mira stiffened. Against my people. He met her gaze. Against soldiers, not families? The air between them tightened, humming with unspoken ghosts. Torrin set the data pad aside, his expression distant. I met my wife after the armistice. She was luminary. Elra. Her breath caught. You loved her. He exhaled, the sound heavy. Still do. He stared into the flames. Her brother didn't approve. Thought she betrayed their blood. We tried to make it work out here on the frontier. Built this farm together. For a while it felt like peace. His voice dropped. Until the scavengers came. Mira's patterns dimmed. You weren't here. I was off-world for supplies. Came back to ashes. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had saved her yesterday. I buried what was left. Built everything again. But the house, it's never felt alive since. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry, he gave a short nod. So am I. For a while, neither spoke. The fire popped softly, the only sound between them. Then something in the corner of the room caught her eye. A small hatch embedded in the floor, barely visible under a rug. A seam of reinforced metal. What's that, she asked. Storage. For what old habits, he said curtly. But later, when he went to check the perimeter sensors, curiosity overcame her. She knelt by the hatch and pressed her palm against the seam. The metal beneath was warm, humming faintly with hidden power. A soft click echoed. The hatch slid open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Her pulse quickened. She descended slowly, the walls gleaming with cold light as the sensors recognized movement. When she reached the bottom, she froze. The underground chamber stretched out before her, a hidden world of polished metal control panels, racks of weapons, communications, relays, and surveillance feeds showing every angle of the property. He wasn't just a farmer. You shouldn't be down here. The voice made her whirl around. Torrin stood at the base of the stairs, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but his tone held no anger, only resignation. So this is who you are, she said softly. Was he corrected? Soldier? Spy? Killer, if you want to be precise. She took a cautious step toward him. Why hide it? Because peace doesn't last if people know who you used to be. He moved past her, tapping a control pad. Holographic maps lit up around them, outlines of the region, sensor grids, signal intercepts. Old systems. I keep them running to feel useful. But these are active, she said, gesturing to the screens. You're still watching. His jaw flexed. Someone has to. The frontier doesn't forgive carelessness. The tension in the air shifted, electric but fragile. Mira looked at him not as a rescuer now, but as something else, a man carved by loss, still choosing to protect strangers. You're not what I expected from a human, she said. He gave a low chuckle. You're not what I expected from a luminary. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the space between them felt charged like static before a storm. Then he looked away, shutting off the holograms. Get some rest, he said gruffly. Tomorrow we'll check the outer fields. Snow's melting fast. She nodded, turning toward the stairs. But before she left, she paused. Torrin. He looked up. Whatever ghosts you keep here, they don't have to haunt you alone. For a moment, his expression softened, just a flicker. Then the mask returned. Good night, Mira. She climbed back up into the dim farmhouse. The hatch sealed shut behind her with a hiss. Outside, the storm had finally broken. Above the clouds, twin moons shone on the snow like two unblinking eyes watching, waiting. And deep underground, a silent alarm began to blink red. The days that followed fell into rhythm, quiet, deliberate, deceptively peaceful. The storm passed, leaving behind a landscape washed clean by frost and sunlight. Mira learned the ways of Torrin's world, how to repair the harvest drones, calibrate the irrigation lines, and read the weather patterns in the shimmer of the sky. Kalen thrived under the routine. He laughed often now, chasing the small, sheep-like creatures through the fields until his cheeks glowed bright with warmth. Sometimes when she watched them, the old soldier and the child of exile, she almost believed peace could last. Almost. The warning came in the quiet hours of early dawn. Torrin was already awake, scanning the outer perimeter feeds, when the alert pinged a faint flickering blip at the edge of his sensor grid. Not the random static of wildlife, too precise, too slow. He frowned. Someone's out there. By the time Mira joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, the sky was pale gray with approaching light. Another scavenger, she asked. He shook his head. No. Military pattern. Energy signature matches luminary tech. Her breath caught. They found us. Torn's gaze was steady. Not yet. Whoever it is, they're alone. Small reading one life form. That's not how my people hunt, she said tightly. They send pairs at least. If there's one more coming. He reached for his coat. Then let's greet our guest before the party starts. They found him near the boundary fence, a tall figure emerging through the mist, his body outlined in faint amber light. A luminary male, his patterns ornate and symmetrical, marking him as a hunter-class operative. His cloak was tattered from travel, but his posture remained regal, almost arrogant. Torn leveled his rifle, calm and unshaking. Stop right there. The stranger obeyed, raising both hands. His eyes flicked between the human and Mira. I mean no harm. His voice was low, measured, the kind that carried authority by habit. Mira's stomach twisted. Nevin. Recognition passed between them, sharp and unwelcome. He bowed slightly, more out of respect than deference. Mira of the Northern Reach. I don't belong to that name anymore. Her tone was ice. Why are you here? Nevin's gaze softened. To find you before the others do. Torn's grip on the rifle tightened. Convenient. Ignoring him, Nevin reached into a pouch at his belt. I bring something from your sister. At the sound of that word, Mira froze. He held out a small pendant, a swirling metal pattern that mirrored the markings on Mira's arm. Family token, luminary bloodright. No one outside the line could carry it. Her hand trembled as she took it. Liana would never part with this. She gave it freely, Nevin said. She's alive, and she sent me to find you. Mira's mind spun. I saw her condemn me. Under duress, Nevin said. Afterwards, she joined a resistance forming within the council. They've learned the truth about the breeding program, the experiments on children, the forced harvestings. She's working to expose it, but she needs your help. Torn's voice cut in sharp as a blade. Why should we believe you? Nevin met his eyes. Because I've seen what they do. I was one of their hunters. I collected the children. I thought I was serving the light. I was wrong. His patterns dimmed with shame. Liana saved me from becoming what they are. Mira studied him, reading the faint tremor of sincerity in his glow. If what you say is true, why come alone? Because others are already on their way. The council sent trackers. They know your son still lives in what he is. Torn stepped forward, the rifle steady but his tone cold. How do they know he's alive? Someone leaked your location, Nevin admitted. I erased what traces I could, but they'll find you soon. Kalen, who had been standing behind Mira, pressed closer to her leg. His small voice broke the silence. Why do they want me? Nevin hesitated. Because your light can vanish. The world seemed to stop. Torrin's eyes snapped to Mira. You can what? Mira looked down at her son, who stared up with frightened defiance. It happened once, she whispered. During the storm, he panicked, his patterns disappeared completely. Torrin exhaled. That's why they want him. A luminary who can suppress their own signal, a ghost in a world that lives by light. Nevin nodded grimly. To the council, he's not a child. He's an evolutionary leap. Mira's anger flared, her patterns blazing hot enough to light the air. He's my son, not their weapon. Nevin inclined his head. And that's why I came. Liana wants to end this expose everything. But she needs proof, and the council keeps their archives sealed in the Northern Research Compound. Torrin's voice was steady. What are you asking us to do? Help us get inside. Your human tech or access codes the boy's ability. It's the only chance we have. Torrin's silence was long measured. Finally, he lowered the weapon. If you're lying, I'll bury you in the snow. Nevin's expression didn't waver. If I'm lying, I deserve it. Mira's hands closed around the pendant. The cool metal pulsed faintly, resonating with her patterns, proof of truth or memory of betrayal, she couldn't tell. Then we move quickly, Torrin said. They'll be here soon. Nevin nodded. Within a day, maybe less. I'll hide my trail. As he turned to leave, Torrin stopped him. You said someone leaked our location. Any idea who? Nevin hesitated. Not who. What? The council has a new system, something alive bred from hybrid minds. It hunts by memory, not signal. His gaze darkened. Once it sees you, it never forgets. He vanished into the storm, leaving behind silence and a rising sense of dread. Inside, Mira stood at the window, clutching her sister's pendant. Kalen slept on the couch, his small chest rising and falling in calm rhythm. Torrin approached, his voice low. You believe him. Yes, so do I, he admitted. She turned to him. Then we prepare. Torrin looked out into the distance where the hunter had disappeared. The war's not done with me, after all. Mira's patterns flickered faintly in the dim light, casting soft reflections across his weathered face. Maybe it's not war, she said quietly. Maybe it's redemption. Outside, the horizon shimmered with faint aurora colors shifting like the eyes of something watching. And somewhere beneath the ice, the memory hunter stirred, following the echo of a woman's glow through the storm. Night came early on Norvvis. The twin moons rose low and red, staining the snowfields with a muted glow that made everything look half alive. Inside the farmhouse, tension coiled like wire. Torrin moved through the rooms, methodically checking locks, calibrating defense drones, ensuring the perimeter sensors were live. The quiet whir of servos and the soft tapping of his boots were the only sounds. Mira sat near the hearth, Kaelin curled up beside her. She watched the flames, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying Nevin's warning, her sister's pendant heavy in her palm. He said they're coming, Torrin murmured from the doorway. They always are, she answered softly. He studied her in the firelight, his features hard, but his voice gentle. We'll hold them off if they come here. Mira shook her head. You don't understand. They won't stop. Once the council marks someone, they chase until the stars burn out. Kaelin stirred in his sleep, mumbling. His patterns glowed faintly beneath the blanket. Mira brushed her fingers across his forehead, and his breathing steadied. Torrin crossed the room, kneeling beside her. He's the reason they'll never stop, isn't he? She nodded, her voice breaking. When he was born, his light was different. Not constant, but shifting like the sky. The seer said it was an anomaly, a flaw. But when he was frightened, his light would vanish completely. They called it a corruption of essence. They didn't see it as a miracle. Torrin looked down at the sleeping boy, the faint shimmer pulsing beneath his skin. In war, the enemy's miracle is always a monster. The wind howled outside, shaking the windows. Mira rose and wrapped her cloak tighter. We should leave before dawn. Torrin straightened. Where will you go? Anywhere they can't find us. There's nowhere like that, he said, voice low but firm. You said it yourself, they hunt until the stars burn out. Then we make a stand here. She turned on him, eyes blazing. You die for us. He didn't flinch. You and the boy are under my protection. That means something to me. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of his words hung heavy between them, ancient binding. Among her people, such a vow would be sacred. Mira's voice trembled. In my culture, those words, they mean you've declared bond. Torrin stepped closer, his gaze steady. Then I know what I said. Before she could respond, a sudden crash from outside shattered the moment. Torrin's instincts took over, rifle in hand, eyes sharp. Stay with him, he ordered. He slipped out the side door, disappearing into the snow. Mira stood frozen, her heart pounding. Then she felt it, not sound but vibration through the ground, faint but rhythmic. Something was moving near the perimeter fence. Kaelin woke abruptly, sitting up with a start. Mother, quiet, she whispered. Stay still. His small hand reached for hers, and the moment their skin touched, the world changed. The faint orange glow that filled the room winked out. The fire's reflection vanished from the glass. Even the subtle hum of the house seemed to fade into silence. Mira looked down. Her own patterns were gone. Her skin was dull, lifeless, utterly dark. Kaelin, she whispered, astonished. What are you doing? He looked up at her, frightened but focused. I don't know. I can make it stop. The light, I can pull it inside. Mira stared, disbelief and awe fighting for control. You can hide us. I think so. Outside, a beam of blue light swept past the window, a luminary scout drone scanning. The beam flickered once, twice, and passed right over the farmhouse without pause. It didn't see them. The air inside the room felt heavy still. Mira could hear her own heartbeat in Kaelin's faint but steady. Then as suddenly as it began, his glow returned. The room was bathed once more in soft amber light. Kaelin gasped and fell forward into her arms, trembling. She held him close, whispering his name, but her eyes were fixed on the window where the drone's fading trail disappeared into the storm. A moment later, the door opened and Torrin stepped in, snow-dusting his coat. We're clear, he said, scanning the room. Then his eyes fell on Mira, her expression, her shaking hands, the faint residual glow clinging to Kaelin's skin. What happened? She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. He hit us. Torrin blinked. What he made our light disappear. Even the scanners missed us. The soldier in him processed it instantly, calculating, analyzing. You're saying he can nullify detection. That's not just camouflage. That's adaptive stealth on a biological level. Mira's gaze hardened. That's why they wanted him. To weaponize him. Torn paced, running a hand through his hair. If they get him, it's over. They could infiltrate any system, any defense net. It'd make them gods. She rose to her feet. Then we leave tonight. He shook his head. No, running makes you a moving target. Staying means I can fight. Fight how against them? Her voice rose. You saw their technology. You can't. He turned sharply, eyes blazing. I can, because I've fought them before. The truth of it hit her like a slap. The soldier he once was, the part buried beneath years of silence, had woken. Mira stepped closer. If you fight for us, they'll kill you. Torn's voice was steady, unwavering. Then they'll learn what dying costs. For a moment, she saw something in him, not just the warrior, but the man behind it. The loneliness, the guilt, the iron will. And beneath it all, the quiet spark of hope she hadn't seen since her exile began. She whispered, "You remind me of her." He frowned. "Who, my sister?" Before the council turned her into their mouthpiece. She used to believe compassion was strength. Torn looked at her, his expression softening. "Sounds like she'd get along with my wife." Mira's breath caught. "You still talk about her as if she's alive." "In some way she is," he said, "in every good thing I try to do." Their eyes met, two lives shaped by loss, now bound by something fragile but real. Outside, the storm was breaking again. But the horizon glowed faintly, not from moonlight, but from ships descending through the clouds. Torn saw it first through the window, his voice a low curse. "They're here." Mira turned, holding Callan close. The boy stirred, half awake, sensing the shift in the air. Torn grabbed his rifle, his movements calm, deliberate. "Go to the bunker," he said. "If we're lucky, they'll only send scouts." Mira met his gaze, the unspoken words hanging between them. "If we're not..." He reached out, touching her hand briefly. "Whatever happens, we make them remember what humans are made of." Her patterns flared, burning bright against the darkness. And what mothers are willing to do. The first explosion hit a moment later, a pulse of blue light tearing across the fields. The storm had returned to Norvvis. But this time it wasn't the weather. The night erupted in fire. A blinding flash tore through the eastern sky, followed by the shriek of plasma bursts cutting the darkness. The ground trembled under the shock waves. Mira instinctively threw herself over Callan, shielding him with her body. Torn was already moving. Years of military training took command where thought couldn't. He barked a command to the farm's AI defense grid, voice low but fierce. "Activate perimeter guns. Pattern Omega-7, full lockdown." The house responded with mechanical efficiency. Hidden turrets rose from the snow outside, locking into place with the hiss of compressed hydraulics. The calm, domestic hum of the farmhouse became the pulsing heartbeat of a war machine awakening from hibernation. Torn snatched a rifle from the wall, old-worn but meticulously maintained. He glanced at Mira, downstairs. Now. She grabbed Callan's hand, sprinting toward the bunker hatch as glass shattered above them. A plasma bolt scorched the wall, filling the air with the metallic scent of burning insulation. They reached the bunker and sealed the hatch just as another explosion rocked the structure. Dust fell from the ceiling, and Callan whimpered. "Stay here," Torn said. "You can't fight them alone." Mira snapped, her voice sharp with fear. His blue eyes burned. "I've been alone my whole damn life, but not tonight." Before she could protest, he was gone. The storm outside raged as Torn emerged from the hatch, his silhouette outlined by fire and lightning. The farm, his sanctuary, his grief, his redemption, was a battlefield now. 3 luminary dropships hovered above the fields, their engines thrumming like thunder. Dozens of luminous figures fanned out across the snow, their glowing skin painting ghostly reflections in the mist. Torn raised his rifle. His movements were calm, economical. Each breath was measured, each step a memory of wars he thought he had buried. Target acquired, a luminary voice echoed across the field, cold and precise. He fired. The shot cracked through the night, amplified by the thin air. One of the glowing forms collapsed instantly, the light within it sputtering out like a dying star. The others scattered, their patterns pulsing rapidly in combat formation. Energy bolts streaked toward him, carving molten lines into the snow. Torn dove behind an overturned loader, returned fire with brutal accuracy, and rolled to new cover before they could triangulate. Inside the bunker, Mira could see the battle through the security feeds. The screens flickered with chaos flashes of orange and blue against white. Kaylin clung to her arm, trembling. "Mother, he's going to die." "No," she said fiercely. "Not while I can still fight." She rose and crossed to the weapons rack Torrin had shown her days ago. Her hand hovered over the guns, trembling. The teachings of her people screamed in protest. Luminary doctrine forbade violence. But doctrine had stolen her home, her family, and almost her son. She picked up the weapon. Her patterns glowed hot against the metal, adapting instinctively to the human tech. She felt the hum of power resonate through her bones. When the hatch opened, the cold struck her like a wall, but she didn't stop. She followed the sound of gunfire into the storm. Torrin saw her through the haze of battle, a slender figure moving through the snowskin, burning with luminous fury. "Damn it, Mira," he shouted. "Get back inside." She ignored him, firing a clean shot that dropped a luminary soldier aiming for his flank. Her weapon hummed with energy as she recharged. They fought side by side, human and alien soldier, in exile, a blur of light and steel against the frozen dark. "You're a quick learner," Torrin said between bursts of fire. She shot another soldier and smirked through the haze. "You're a terrible teacher." A plasma bolt exploded nearby, throwing them both to the ground. Torrin's rifle was torn from his grip. The heat burned through his coat, searing his shoulder. He bit back a curse and crawled toward his weapon, but a shadow loomed over him, a luminary officer, tall and broad, energy spear raised. Before the blow could fall, Mira leapt forward, her weapon spinning from her hand. She struck the officer in the throat with the butt of her rifle, then slammed her glowing palm against his chest. Her patterns flared white-hot, overloading his energy shield. The soldier convulsed, collapsing in a spray of light and ash. Torrin stared at her, breathless. "Remind me never to make you angry." "Too late for that," she said, helping him up. They turned as another explosion rocked the field. One of the ships had taken a direct hit from the automated guns. It spiraled out of control, crashing into the far silo in a storm of fire. The blast wave threw them both backward. The world turned white. When Mira opened her eyes, everything was chaos. Smoke filled the air, thick and acrid. The farmhouse was burning, its walls crumbling. She couldn't see Torrin. Panic seized her chest. "Torrin," she shouted. A groan answered her. He was half buried under debris, blood streaking his temple. She dragged the wreckage off him with trembling hands. "You stubborn human," she hissed. "You were supposed to survive." He coughed, eyes focusing on her, still planning to. Together, they stumbled toward the bunker. Overhead, the last remaining ship hovered low, preparing another strike. Mira felt it before she saw it, a pulse of light behind her, faint but growing. Kalen stood at the entrance of the bunker, his small hands glowing with fierce, controlled energy. His eyes blazed bright as stars. "Mother," he said, voice trembling, "I can stop them." The world seemed to still. Torrin's voice was hoarse. "Kalen, don't," but it was too late. The light around the boy folded inward, then burst outward in a wave of distortion. The ship's sensors flickered, its engines whining as control systems crashed. The massive vessel spun wildly, missing its target by meters before slamming into the frozen plain beyond the farm. The explosion painted the horizon in fire, then silence. The only sounds were the crackle of flames and the soft hum of Kalen's fading glow. Torrin stared at him in disbelief. "He shut down their systems." Mira fell to her knees, clutching her son. "You saved us." Kalen's voice was faint. "I just wanted it to stop." Torrin's gaze drifted to the burning ruins of his home. The farm, everything he'd built to bury his past, was gone. But standing there in the snow with Mira and Kalen alive beside him, he realized something. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. He turned to Mira. "We can't stay here." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. He looked toward the horizon where the wreckage burned, wherever they'll never think to look together. Behind them, the flames consumed the farmhouse, the firelight reflecting in their eyes like twin stars. Above, the aurora shifted once more, not blue or green, but gold, the color of rebirth. And the snow began to fall again, covering the battlefield, erasing the scars of war, but not the memory. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was worse. Smoke still coiled into the pale sky, a black scar across the white expanse of Norvvis. The once proud farmhouse now lay in ruins, a skeleton of twisted steel and charred wood, half buried in ash. Mira stood at the edge of the wreckage, her cloak whipping in the cold wind. The rising sun painted the snowfields in shades of gold and blood. Behind her, Torrin adjusted the straps of his pack, a faint grimace betraying the wound on his shoulder. Kalen, small and quiet, walked between them. His patterns were faint, not from exhaustion, but from guilt. He hadn't spoken since the explosion. Mira crouched in front of him, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "You did what you had to do," she whispered. He shook his head. "I hurt people. They came to hurt us," she said softly. "Sometimes survival looks ugly. That doesn't make it wrong." Torrin watched them from a few paces away. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were dark-haunted. Every burnt plank, every fallen beam around them was a reminder of Elra, of loss, of yet another home turned to ashes. "Time to move," he said finally. "The smoke will draw scavengers or worse." They walked through the wastes, leaving behind the ruin that had once been sanctuary. The path wound between ice ridges and jagged rock formations, each step crunching over frost. The wind sang low across the plains, a mournful dirge that seemed to carry ghosts. By midday, they reached the old irrigation channel Torrin had mentioned, a half-collapsed trench cutting through the frozen earth. They followed it south where the terrain rose into cliffs streaked with veins of violet ore. Kalen suddenly stopped. "Wait," he said quietly. Torrin turned, scanning the horizon. "What is it?" The boy tilted his head slightly, eyes unfocused. "Someone's crying." Mira's breath caught. "Are you sure?" He nodded, his patterns flickering with concentration. "There, beyond those rocks." Torrin frowned. "No readings on sensors. She's not human," Kalen whispered. "She's like me." Without hesitation, Mira took his hand and started toward the rocks. Torrin cursed under his breath, but followed. They climbed over the ridge and found a hollow in the stone, and inside it, a child. A luminary girl, barely 600 years old by their measure, the equivalent of a human 7-year-old. Her orange skin was pale with cold, and her patterns flickered erratically like a candle in wind. A crude medical patch covered her forearm. She recoiled when she saw them. "No more tests," she whimpered. "Please, no more." Mira froze. The girl's voice was raw with terror. She knelt slowly, setting down her weapon. "We're not with the council," she said gently. "You're safe now." The girl pressed herself against the wall of the hollow, trembling. Torrin stayed back, lowering his weapon. "You've got away with kids," he murmured. Kalen stepped forward, cautiously crouching until he was at her eye level. "See?" he said softly, holding out his glowing hand. Then with visible effort, he made his light fade, disappearing completely. The girl's eyes widened. "You can hide the light." He nodded. "And I can hide yours too if you want." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Then the girl reached out hesitantly, fearfully, and placed her small hand in his. Her light dimmed to match his. For the first time, she smiled. Mira felt her throat tighten. "What's your name, little one, Rena?" the girl whispered. Torrin knelt beside her, examining the wound on her arm. "You're lucky. This patch is council issue meant for temporary restraint. They tagged you for transport." Rena flinched at the word council. "They were taking us to the deep labs," she said in a rush. "That's where the other kids go. They said it was for the ascension." Mira's heart clenched. The same lie they had told her about Kalen. "Did you see anyone else? A woman patterns like mine?" Rena's eyes brightened. "Yes, the kind lady. She brought us sweets, but then the bad doctors caught her. They put her in the room with the locks." Mira's voice trembled. "Liana." Torrin glanced at her. "Your sister." "She's alive," Mira whispered, equal parts relief and dread. Torrin's expression hardened. "Then we go after her." Rena looked up, panicked. "You can't. The mountain eats people." Torrin crouched until he was eye level with her. "Mountains don't eat people. People hiding in mountains do." The girl pointed toward the horizon. 10 kilometers north. "There's a gate that breathes fire. That's where the ships go in." Torrin nodded grimly. "The research complex." He turned to Mira. "We can't take her with us. She's too young, too weak." "I'm not leaving her here," Mira said sharply. "She'll freeze or starve." Torrin hesitated, then he sighed. "There's a human settlement 20 clicks west. Small outpost researchers mostly. They'll help her." "I'll take her," he said finally. "You and Kellen head east. Find the mountain approach." Mira's patterns dimmed. "I don't like splitting up." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But we don't have a choice. We can't drag a child into a fortress." She opened her mouth to argue, but his hand came to rest on her shoulder. "I'll find you," he said quietly. "I swear it." Their eyes met, an unspoken promise passing between them. Later, as dusk fell, they made camp in a small cave near the ridge. Rena slept between Kalen and Mira, their faint glows mingling in the dark like braided light. Torrin sat at the cave mouth rifle across his knees, watching the horizon. "You've changed him," he said softly. Mira looked up. "Kalen." He nodded. "He looks at the world differently now. Kinder." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's you. Humans are unpredictable, but your compassion runs deep." Torrin chuckled quietly. "Compassion gets you killed out here. Or saves you," she countered. The fire between them crackled softly. Torrin looked at her, really looked, and for a fleeting second he saw not an alien, not an exile, but something achingly familiar. A reflection of his own will to survive. "When this is over," she said, voice barely a whisper, "what happens to us?" Torrin met her gaze. "Whatever we want to happen." She smiled, then small, fragile, but real. Above them the moons climbed higher, their twin lights casting long shadows over the snow. Somewhere beyond the ridges, the fires of the council burned bright. Tomorrow they would walk into that fire, together or not at all. Dawn on Norvvis came pale and cold. The light was thin, like the world itself was afraid to wake. Mira stood at the mouth of the cave, watching Torrin and Rena grow smaller against the horizon as they made their way toward the west. The child clung to his coat, and he walked slower than usual, pacing his steps to match hers. When they finally vanished into the snow haze, the silence hit her like a physical blow. Kalen came to stand beside her. "Will he come back?" he asked softly. Mira wrapped an arm around him, drawing him close. "He promised," she said, "and he doesn't break promises." Still, she couldn't shake the cold knot in her chest, that instinctual dread that had lived there since the day of their exile. By midday, they began their march toward the mountain. The sky had turned from pale silver to bruised gray. The air grew heavier with each step, charged with the faint, metallic scent of ion storms brewing above. Kalen's patterns pulsed faintly as he walked his energy low. "Mother," he said after a while, "what if they're too strong?" She squeezed his hand. "Then we'll remind them that strength isn't only in power." "What is it in then?" "In love," she said quietly, "and the will to protect it." The words felt hollow against the rising wind, but she spoke them anyway. They reached the mountain by dusk. It rose like a black monolith from the frozen plains, its sides carved with the smooth precision of machines. Streams of vapor vented from the cracks, geothermal exhaust from the complex below. The faint orange glow from the vents painted the snow in the same hue as luminary blood. Mira crouched behind a ridge, scanning the surface for entry points. "Rena said there was a maintenance tunnel," she murmured. "Small, hard to see." Kalen's eyes unfocused again. He tilted his head, listening to something beyond hearing. There he whispered, pointing toward a narrow fissure half covered in snow. The entrance was barely wide enough for them to crawl through, but it sloped downward quickly, the walls changing from ice to metal. The faint hum of power grew stronger with every step. Inside, the air was warmer, stale, with recycled oxygen. The walls pulsed faintly with the familiar bioluminescent veins of luminary architecture. Mira's stomach churned. The glow of this place was wrong, cold, clinical, stripped of the spiritual warmth her people associated with light. Here the glow wasn't life, it was control. Meanwhile, miles away, Torrin arrived at the human settlement with Rena in tow. The outpost was a cluster of low metal domes built into the rocky terrain to shield against storms. He'd expected suspicion, even hostility, but when he mentioned the girl's condition, the researchers didn't hesitate. They took her in at once, their expressions grim but resolute. "She's one of the council's test subjects," he explained to the lead researcher, a woman named Dr. Harlan. "She escaped." Dr. Harlan's eyes darkened. "We've heard rumors. They call it genetic refinement. I call it butchery." Torrin nodded. "You'll keep her safe from the council," she snorted. "You have no idea how many refugees we've hidden already." He gave a short nod, then turned to Rena. She hugged him tightly, small arms clutching at his coat. "You'll come back." "I will," he said. "And when I do, I expect you to tell me you've eaten 3 meals a day and stayed out of trouble." The girl giggled weakly. "Okay." As he left the outpost, the sky above the mountains flickered with lightning. The storm had begun. He adjusted his rifle and whispered to himself, "Hang on, Mira." Inside the mountain, the air thrummed with energy. Mira moved carefully through the tunnels Kalen closed behind. They passed through corridors filled with dormant machines and walls etched with flowing patterns, the luminary equivalent of circuitry. In the distance they heard voices, two guards speaking in low tones. Mira pressed Kaylin against the wall, holding her breath. Council's orders came through this morning, one said. Extraction begins at dawn. The human interference won't matter. The boy's genetics will secure our evolution. Her pulse hammered. The boy, Kaylin. They passed when the guards moved on, slipping deeper into the facility until the corridors opened into a wide chamber, an observation deck overlooking a massive lab. Mira froze. Below, hundreds of glass pods stretched in neat rows, each glowing with soft blue light. Inside each one was a child. Some were awake and staring at the ceiling. Others lay still, tubes feeding into their veins. Kaylin's hand trembled in hers. Mother! She swallowed hard, forcing herself to look. This is what they wanted you for. A figure stood at the far end of the chamber, giving orders to technicians. Tall, robed in ceremonial armor that shimmered with gold, Elder Thraw, the same voice that had condemned her to exile. Mira's patterns flared with fury. Stay here, she told Kaylin. Hide your light, but do it. Before she could move, a voice behind her said, You won't need to fight alone. Torrin stepped from the shadows, rifle slung across his shoulder, face set in grim determination. Torrin, she breathed. How had help, he said shortly. Met a scientist named Saren. She's part of Liana's network. There's an uprising brewing inside this place. Before Mira could respond, an explosion rocked the corridor. Red lights flared along the walls as alarms wailed. Looks like it started, Torrin said. Come on. They fought their way down through the chaos, guards shouting systems, flickering smoke filling the air. Torrin's shots were precise, non-lethal, when possible deadly, when not. Mira moved with lethal grace, striking at weak points only a luminary would know. At last, they reached the control platform overlooking the pod chamber. Elder Thraw turned, his face carved from ice. You, he spat, the heretic who defied the ascension. You bring a human into sacred ground. Sacred Mira's voice shook with rage. You turned our children into experiments. The purity of our kind demands sacrifice, Thra said. The humans breed like vermin. We must adapt or perish. Torrin raised his rifle, then perish. Thoreau's patterns blazed white. You think you can stop the inevitable? I don't think, Torrin said, pulling the trigger. I know. The shot hit the control console behind Thraw, detonating it in a burst of light. Systems cascaded into chaos. Pods began to unlock, alarms shrieking. The lab dissolved into pandemonium. Mira ran to the nearest pod, pulling the release lever. The glass slid open with a hiss, and a small, luminary child tumbled into her arms. It's all right, she whispered. You're safe now. Across the room, Kaylin was helping others, using his power to dampen the glowing sensors that tracked them. Then a scream cut through the noise. Liana Mira turned, and there she was. Her sister stood behind a security barrier, restrained but alive, her patterns dim but steady. Torrin moved to the controls, firing at the locks. I've got her. A searing bolt of plasma hit him in the shoulder, throwing him back. Elder Thraw stood at the upper balcony, weapon in hand, eyes wild. You cannot undo what destiny has chosen. Mira's fury erupted. She raised her hand, channeling every ounce of her light, not as warmth, but as power. The glow surged through her skin, a radiant storm that filled the chamber. Then destiny can burn, she cried. Her energy exploded outwards, shattering the barrier, sending Thraw sprawling. The consoles around him overloaded, releasing the pods in a chain reaction. Liana stumbled free, her eyes meeting Mira's. Sister, no time, Mira said, helping her up. We have to go. Torrin staggered to his feet, blood seeping through his coat. Saren's people have triggered the data release, he said. Every luminary colony will see what they've done here. Then it's over. Liana whispered. No, Mira said. It's beginning. They ran through collapsing corridors, alarms screaming overhead. Kaylin led the way, his gift cloaking them from detection drones. Behind them, explosions tore through the mountain, the death cry of a civilization's arrogance. At the surface, the night air hit them like freedom. The facility burned behind them, its vents belching fire into the sky. Torrin dropped to one knee, breath ragged. That's one hell of an ending. Mira knelt beside him, gripping his hand. No, she said softly, it's a beginning. Above them, the first light of dawn broke through the smoke, not cold or distant this time, but warm. And in that fragile light, the remnants of two worlds, human and luminary, walked away together toward a future neither had imagined, but both had earned. The mountain burned for 3 days. From the southern plains, the fires could be seen even through the storm, a pillar of orange and gold clawing at the sky, the final death cry of a corrupted empire. The council was finished. The breeding sanctums, the laboratories, the lies of purity, all reduced to ash. When the flames finally died, Norvvis was quiet again. Too quiet. Torrin woke to the sound of wind. The scent of antiseptic and herbs filled his lungs. His eyes fluttered open, and the first thing he saw was Mira asleep beside his bed. Her hair spilled over her shoulder, glowing faintly with the rhythm of her breathing. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The movement stirred her. Her eyes opened instantly, luminous, alert. Relief flooded her face when she saw him awake. "You're alive," she breathed. "Not for lack of trying," he rasped. She smiled, though her eyes glistened. "You took a plasma shot to the shoulder and a wall to the ribs. You shouldn't even be sitting up." "I've had worse." "You always say that." He reached for her hand, his rough fingers brushing over the faintly glowing patterns on her skin. "And you always saved me anyway." She squeezed his hand gently. "You saved me first." For a while, neither spoke. The room was small, carved into the stone of an old outpost, one of the safe houses run by the human researchers who had sheltered Rena. Beyond the walls, the faint hum of rebuilding echoed, ships coming and going, messages transmitted, the first fragile alliances being formed between species that had once feared each other. Torrin looked around. "How long was I out?" 6 days, Mira said softly. "The council collapsed within 2. Liana's alive. She's helping form a new council, one that includes human advisors." He raised an eyebrow. "They'll love that." She says they need it. They can't rebuild what they were. They have to become something new. Torrin exhaled slowly. About time someone said it out loud. Later that day, he found Kalen outside, sitting on a low stone wall overlooking the valley. The boy's small frame was silhouetted against the horizon, his patterns dim, reflective. "Mind if I sit?" Torrin asked. Kalen nodded silently. Torrin eased himself down beside him, careful not to strain his healing ribs. For a while, they watched the wind sweep across the snow, carrying with it the faint scent of fire and ozone. "I hurt people," Kalen said finally, a voice barely audible. Torrin nodded. "Yeah, you did." The boy's eyes glistened. "I didn't want to." "I know." Torrin looked out at the sky. "Sometimes doing what's right still hurts. Doesn't make it wrong." Kalen was quiet for a long time. "Mother says I'm different. Dangerous." Torrin turned to him. "You're different, sure. But not dangerous. The ones who wanted to use you, they were dangerous. You're the reason they lost." The boy frowned, brow furrowed in thought. "Do you think they'll ever stop hating each other? Humans and Luminary?" Torrin looked at the distant horizon where the last embers of the council's fortress still smoldered. "Maybe not," he said honestly, "but maybe we can make them forget for a while." Kalen tilted his head. "Forget, yeah," Torrin said with a faint smile. "By showing them something worth remembering instead." The boy considered that, then smiled, small but real. A week later, they returned to the farm, or what was left of it. The fields were blackened, the barns collapsed, and the air still carried the faint metallic tang of burned machinery. Yet even amid the ruin, life had begun to return. New grass pushed through the ash. The wooled quadrupeds had wandered back, bleating softly at the sight of their caretaker. Torrin stood in the middle of the wreckage arms, crossed lips pressed in a thin line. "Never thought I'd rebuild the same damn place twice." Mira stepped beside him, her patterns pulsing with faint light. "Then don't rebuild it the same. Build it better." He looked at her, the way the wind caught her silver white hair, the warmth in her golden eyes. "Better, huh?" She smiled, with room for more than one kind of life. He chuckled softly. "Guess that means indoor heating this time." Kellen laughed, chasing one of the surviving animals across the yard. The sound, pure, unguarded laughter, filled the air like sunlight through clouds. For the first time in a long time, Torrin felt something in his chest unclench. By the next season, the farm was alive again. Children played in the yard, not just Kalen, but a handful of others rescued from the council's facilities. Luminary and human researchers came and went, helping to restore the land. The new council, led by Liana, had declared the farm a healing sanctuary. Survivors of both races could come here to rest, to learn, to begin again. Torin's once isolated homestead had become something unthinkable, a symbol of unity. That evening, as the twin moons rose, Mira stood on the porch watching the children plant new seeds in the garden. Their laughter carried on the wind. Torin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, her patterns glowing softly where they touched. "They're adapting faster than I expected," she murmured. "Kids do that," Torin said. "They don't see the lines we draw." She turned in his arms, smiling faintly. "When I first came here, I thought humans were, crude, chaotic, loud." He smirked. "You weren't wrong, but I also thought you were heartless." She placed her palm against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. "I was wrong about that, too." His expression softened. "And I thought your people were cold, arrogant, untouchable." She raised an eyebrow. "And now," he kissed her forehead, "now I know better." For a long time, they stood there in silence, watching the moons climb higher. The light painted their faces gold and blue, human and luminary merging in reflection. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "Every day." And he smiled faintly. "I stopped thinking about it." She laughed softly, the sound warm and tired. "That's the most human answer I've ever heard." "Good," he said. "Means it's working." Later that night, after the children had gone to sleep, Mira sat on the porch steps tracing idle patterns in the dirt. Her glow mingled with the faint bioluminescence of the alien flowers that had begun to grow near the fence. Torin joined her, carrying 2 mugs of steaming tea. "You ever notice," he said, "how this place glows more now than it used to?" "It's not the place," she said softly. "It's the people." They sat together in the quiet, the air thick with the scent of soil and new life. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, just peaceful. After a while, Mira spoke again. "Do you ever regret it? Taking us in." He turned his head toward her. "If I hadn't opened that door, I'd still be living with ghosts." She reached out and traced the scar on his cheek, her patterns lighting softly beneath her fingertips. "You still are," she said gently. "But now they're not alone." He smiled, a quiet, tired smile that held more truth than words ever could. "Guess that makes us both haunted," he said. "Then we're haunted together." The wind stirred the fields, carrying with it the faint hum of life. As the night deepened, Mira's gaze drifted upward. The sky shimmered with the aurora ribbons of gold and silver dancing through the darkness. Kalen stepped onto the porch, half asleep, rubbing his eyes. "Mother Torin." She smiled and held out her arms. "Come here, little one." He crawled into her lap, warm and heavy. His patterns pulsed gently against her skin, sinking to her own rhythm. Torin watched them, something stirring in his chest. He thought of Elra, of the war of loss and forgiveness, and realized this was what she would have wanted him to find. Not peace, but purpose. "Look," Mira whispered, pointing to the sky. "The lights. Do you see?" Kalen nodded sleepily. "They look like us." She smiled. "They are us. Different colors, same light." Torin wrapped an arm around them both, pulling them close as the aurora shimmered overhead. And for the first time in living memory, Norvvis was at peace. Not because the world had changed, but because for once someone had dared to.